Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video I'm going to be going over the Redux Toolkit library as a state management solution for your applications in React. This video is primarily intended for beginners, so I will be taking you guys since the beginning how to install the package, how to set it up in your application, and go through an example of how to use it in your own web app. If you're interested in checking out the code for this video, it will be in the description below, together with the text guide for this tutorial as well on my website called PedroTech.com. There you will find a bunch of other tutorials as well and more information related to my channel. So without further ado, let's get into the video. But before we get into the video, let me take a second to talk to you guys a little bit about today's sponsor, Brilliant.org. Brilliant is an amazing course platform which offers thousands of interactive lessons on a variety of subjects ranging from math to data science to programming and even AI. Whether you are a beginner or an expert on a topic, with Brilliant's hands-on approach, you will gain the help you need to grasp complex topics in an easier and faster manner. Especially if you enjoy the way I teach, I really recommend Brilliant because they have a pretty good focus on problem solving and learning by actually practicing what you're learning. So after each lesson, you'll be able to practice your skills by doing different exercises, which is one of the best parts of the platform. One of the courses that they have that I personally really enjoy is the course on how LLMs work. As you guys might know, I'm a programmer. So in order for me to keep myself up to date with the fast growing AI industry, I needed to deep dive into one of its fundamental concepts. And this course specifically will teach you anything ranging from an introduction to language models, how the models can calculate word probabilities, and even how to improve existing models. I personally really enjoy how they designed the course, and I highly recommend it for anyone watching this video. If you're interested in anything that I mentioned here, I would really appreciate if you guys could check them out. The link will be in the description. By checking them out, you guys will be supporting my channel. And the best part is that Brilliant specifically is free for the first 30 days if you use my link in the description. That's brilliant.org/PedroTech, or go to the link in the description. Not only that, but Brilliant was really nice to give all of my subscribers 20% off their premium annual subscription, but only if you use my link. So if you're interested in checking them out, just click the link below. And again, thank you so much, Brilliant, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into the video.
Okay everyone, we're going to start off this tutorial by creating the React application that we're going to be building. I'm over here, as you can see, inside of an empty folder. I just have one file, which you don't need to have. I'm going to be using this to paint some diagrams so I can do some explanation later. However, this is basically an empty folder that I just opened on VS Code. Now I want to create my React project by using the command npx create vite, and just gonna create my project on the same folder I'm in. I'm gonna make a React project, and we're gonna be using JavaScript for this tutorial so that I make this tutorial inclusive for everyone. So I'm gonna run npm install. It's just gonna install all of the packages that we're gonna have over here in our React project. And I'm going to run npm run dev, which should start the application over here on the right. I'm going to also make this a bit bigger so we can focus more on the code. But what I want is to first install the libraries that we're going to be using in this tutorial. Now, the only two libraries we're going to be installing is the Redux Toolkit library, which is at ReduxJS/toolkit, and the React Redux library. Now I'll explain what each of them are, but we need to install both of them, and once we have that installed, we are able to use it in our project. Now I'm just going to delete all of the boilerplate code that comes with a Vite app, and we'll get a fresh start in our project. Now, before we start writing anything, I want to give you guys a really quick overview on what Redux Toolkit is. If you're watching this video, you've probably heard of the word Redux, or you maybe have some sort of experience with Redux in the past. And the reason for that is because back in the day, Redux was extremely powerful, and it was essential for you to learn if you were learning React. It is an all-in-one state management solution that allows you to manage very complex applications, and thus it was a powerhouse in the industry. Every React app used Redux. Now, why am I saying everything in a past tense? Well, in reality, Redux kind of had a decline in popularity, and the reason for that was because more simple solutions like Zustand and Jotine started appearing in the market, which basically allowed developers to manage their states without having to deal with all of the negative parts of Redux. Now, what are those negative parts? Well, you might have experienced Redux in the past. It is kind of complicated in the beginning. It has a steep learning curve. It required a lot of boilerplate code. And that is exactly what Redux Toolkit solves. It is an official library that simplifies Redux development, making it extremely easy for you to set up and maintain. So we have to install the React Redux library because it uses Redux, but it's an extension of it to facilitate you writing and managing your code. Now, is it any less powerful than actual old school Redux? No, not at all. And I even recommend you using React Redux, and I even recommend you using Redux Toolkit if you have the option to. Now that I got that out of the way, I want to start setting up our Redux Toolkit application. Now, what does Redux Toolkit does for our app? Well, like I said, it will help us manage states. It's the whole idea of creating a global state and application that can be passed around and used in multiple components. Now, in Redux Toolkit and in Redux in general, we call this a store. And a store is where we're going to keep the state of our app. Even though Redux was originally designed to only use a single store, with newer versions of Redux, you're actually allowed to customize your contexts and providing multiple stores if you want so as well. Now, we're going to have to create that store somewhere in our app. And it's recommended that you create a file called store.js where you're going to hold that data. Now, inside of here, we're going to create our store by importing in the top from the @ReduxJS Toolkit library, we're going to import the function configure store. Now, inside of here, we're just going to export and create a constant called store, and we're going to set it equal to configure store. Now, this configure store object over here is going to require a reducer passed in as prop. Now, what is a reducer in Redux or in Redux Toolkit as a whole? Well, reducers are functions that specify how the state of your application should change in response to an action. A reducer as a function will take in two arguments. It will take in a state and it will take in an action. The state will be the current state of the part of the application that specific reducer manages. And an action is going to be an object describing what happened in your application, and it might even include some payload, which means some data that you might need to execute that change in the state. Now, I know that might all seem a little bit complicated, but it will get way simpler, trust me. But the main idea that I want you to understand, in Redux Toolkit, this reducer object over here will include all of the different parts of your application that will have some sort of state that you want to manage. And inside of it, you'll write functions that are going to act like the ones we just explained, right? They're going to take in the state of the application, they're going to take in some sort of action, some sort of payload, and they're going to act on it. Now, to write all of the functions that we are going to handle in our app, especially if our app is big and it has multiple parts of it, we wouldn't want to put all of it over here. So Redux Toolkit allows us to separate all of them by creating what is known as a slice. Now, we're going to create that slice in a different place from this. We're going to create it inside of a different file. I'm going to actually come over here and I'm going to create a file over here, which is going to hold the slice that we want to use in this application. Now, what is going to be this app project that I'm going to be building here so you guys can actually understand Redux Toolkit? Well, it's going to be a very simple movie management system. So we're going to be able to add movies, remove movies, deal with movies in a CRUD sense, if you know what I mean. And I'm going to create here a file called movie slice.js. Now, over here, we're going to leave it as it is right now and deal with it later. Now, inside of this movie slice over here, we will deal with all of the reducer functions that we want to have in our store. And they are going to be specifically only the movie reducer functions, because remember, we can have different parts of our store that handle different states in our application. That's why we can divide them into specific slices. If I had a different part of my app which I was handling data related to a user and I want to keep track of the state of this user, like if they're logged in or their name or their email, all of that, I would probably create a user slice and I would pass them over here. So it's just a way for us to organize our data. It's specifically a set of reducer logic and actions for a particular part of your state. Now, how do I create this slice of our state? Well, the way I do it is to import over here in the top from at Redux.js Toolkit, and I want to import the create slice function. Now, inside of here, I want to create a movie slice variable. I'm going to set it equal to create slice, and I'm going to pass in an object containing how this state is going to act. The first thing I want to do is give a name for this slice. So I'm going to put over here name, and I'm just going to put movies. Then I need to pass in an initial state. Now, this has to be an object, and it's going to look very similar to this. Since we're just going to have, in this example, it's a little app that has a list of movies. It displays the movies. You can add to that list, and you can delete from that list. That's as simple as I can get as an example here for you. To do something like that, we're going to need a state, which is going to represent the movies, right? And it's a list. So I'm going to create here an object called initial state, and I'm just going to pass in how the state looks like. It has a movies field with an array. But if this included more things, you could pass them over here as well. Now, I'm going to pass this object initial state directly over here. And then we need to pass in the reducers. Now, I know it sometimes gets a bit confusing because we had to define reducer over here. But no, reducer over here are all the functions that we want for our store for each of their states, right? But the thing is, we're creating a slice over here. Now, this slice specifies that the state for the slice will look like this. It will have a movies array. And here, we're going to tell this slice how we want to interact with this array or the state whenever some action happens. Now, to do that, we have to create different functions that we can call, or different reducer functions that we can call. The first one is going to be an action to add a movie to the state. I'm going to create here add movie, and it's going to be a function, and we'll write some logic to execute this function. And the second one is going to be remove movie. Again, it's going to be a function that is going to do some action. So you're starting to understand, hopefully, how the reducers work. We have this state, and inside of here, we can dispatch or call this functions whenever we want to make some mutation or change to the state. Now, how does this reducers functions look like? Well, like I said in the beginning, they take in two arguments. One is going to be the state, and one is going to be the action. We're going to do the same for both of them. Now, the state over here will help us because this will allow us to have access to the current state of this movies array whenever we want to add a movie. And why is that important? Because, well, when we want to add a movie to the list, we need to know how the list was before to then just push the new value, right? So we could do something like this. Whenever we call this add movie reducer function over here, we could just say something like state.movies.push, right? And then we could push a new value to the end of this movies list. And then whenever we have the logic for it in the UI, we can just call this add movie reducer function. The thing is, what do we put over here? How do we get data to pass inside of here? Well, that data is going to be passed through this action object over here. More specifically, it's going to be passed through the action.payload. Now, you can have multiple actions that you can deal with inside of here, and you can specifically pass a type if you want to as well. I'm going to explain a little bit more of what we can do with this later on, but for now, we can just get the payload. That's going to be the object that is going to help us. So in our case, we'll probably just pass on a new movie object over here, and it will push to that array. Now, I'll create the remove movie later on because I feel like we already have enough to get some things going so that you start understanding how this whole logic that we're writing over here actually correlates to our React app. Well, what we want to do now is just export the reducer functions that we just created. So to do that, we're going to set this object equal to the movie slice.actions, and this is going to return back the functions that we have over here, the add movie and the remove movie function. Now I'm going to put over here add movie and remove movie, and we'll export them to access it in different files. Now we also want to export default the reducer of the movie slice. So I'm going to say movie slice.reducer. Now, why do we want to export default this? Well, it's so that in our store over here now, we can just import the movie reducer from /movie slice and just pass it over here. We can say movies is equal to movie reducer. Now, before we move on, I just want to make one thing clear to just summarize this file, because it's the one that I've seen beginners most get confused with, and don't worry, it is expected. We basically just define two actions that can happen in our app that interact with the state, which is the movie state. We created the action for the add movie, the action for the remove movie. The add movie one just adds some action to the movie array. The remove movie will remove one. We exported both of those actions so that we can later access them in our components. And we also exported the reducer so that we can add it to the store. Now, are we done? Can we access them and deal with all of that in our components over here? Well, no, because we need to pass in, tell our app about the Redux store that we created and actually use it in our application. So I'm going to open here our main.jsx, or if you're using, I don't know, Create Direct DOM, it's just the entry point of your app. And over here, we want to import a couple things. First, we want to import from React Redux the provider component. Now, this provider component, we're going to pass around, like right around our app, so that it tells React Redux that we want the whole app that we're creating to have access to that store and all of its states and actions that we're creating. So over here in this provider, we have to pass in a store, and we've created the store on the store.js file. So I'm going to import from /store the store that we created and just pass it over here. If you don't do this, you won't have access to your store, and nothing that we do from now on will matter. This basically will allow our whole app to have access to the Redux state. Now, let's start creating our components. Well, we're going to have a little list which is going to display the list of movies. We're going to have an input which is going to allow us to create movies, and we're also going to have some sort of logic to delete movies. So I want to create a couple components. I'm going to create a folder over here called components. And inside of here, we're going to first create the movie list.js, and we're going to create the movie input.js. Now, in the movie list.js, which is the first one we're going to deal with, I want to, first of all, import React from React. Then I want to export a const called movie list and generate my component. Then I'll just return for now a little div tag saying movie list. And I'll import this inside of here and just display it. Perfect. Why is it giving me an error? Well, I just realized that I called this .js and not JSX. Sorry about that. I'll do the same for this. Perfect. Let's refresh this. Perfect. Now it's appearing over here. Now, what we want to do is we want to display the list of movies that currently are in the slice. Just as an example, I want to create here a sample of 1 or 2 movies in our initial state. So the way a movie state will look like is just an object with an ID, which will give the first one as 1, and a name, which we'll call something like Interstellar. Just as an example. I'll create one more just for us to have more simple data. I'll put 2 over here, and I'll call this Harry Potter. Perfect. Now we have some data at least to work with. Now, how do I fetch this data inside of here? Well, to do that, I want to, first of all, create a little header tag just so we can separate where we're going to display the list. And I want to import here on the top a hook from React Redux called the use selector hook. Now this hook over here is one of the 2 important hooks you need to learn from React Redux. This one specifically is for getting data from your state. So if you want to get information in the current state of one of your states, you use the useSelector hook. Now, how do I specify which information or which state I want to access? Well, you create a variable that is going to hold the value of that state. In our case, we want the list of movies, so I'll say movies. And I'm going to set it equal to the useSelector hook. And here, we'll pass in a callback function that will allow us to have access to the state of all of our states inside of our store. And we'll be able to specify that we want to get the state dot movies, because this is we're specifying that it's on the movies reducer. And we want to then, inside of the movies reducer, inside of the movie slice, we want to access the movies array. So I'll say dot movies again. So if this, just because I realize it might be a bit confusing, if this was called, I don't know, computer, then this would have to be state.computer.movies. You know what I mean? We're accessing them based on first the reducer name, and then inside of this reducer name, what part of the state we want to have access to. And in our case, it's called movies. Now, inside of here, we now have this movies list. I want to loop through that. So I'll say movies.map, and I'll loop through a movie. And for each movie inside of our list, we want to just display a little div that is going to contain, first of all, the name of the movie. So I'm just going to say movie.name. Immediately, you should say that this worked. So we successfully created a state in our store inside of our slice, and we can access that information. Now, I also want to put here in the div a key, which is going to be the movie.id, so we can generate it. And now we have dealt with getting that data, but how do we interact with that data? I want to be able to add a new movie to this list. What we want to do now is we'll come to our movie input over here, and we're going to create a component for it. So we'll say movie input is equal to a component, and it will just return an input. Now I want to import that in our app.jsx. I'm going to actually import above the movie list, movie input. And inside of here, we want to have two things. I just realized not just one input. We want to have an input, and we want to have a button. So I'm going to say button here as well. And this button will say add movie. Perfect. Now, inside of here, I want to keep track of whatever a user is writing on this input so that we can click on the add movie button and add a movie to this list. So to do that, I'm going to create a state, which is going to give us that functionality to keep track of the movie or the new movie that we want to add. So I'm going to create a state with a new movie value and a set new movie setter function. Now I want to create a function called handle add movie, which we're going to call when we want to add a new movie. So let's deal with both of them. Let's put the on click for this button as the handle add movie. And on this input over here, I want to pass in on change, which will grab the event from it, and we'll just set the new movie equal to the event.target.value. What this will do, as you might be familiar with, is will just allow us that to type on this input, and whenever we type any character, it will automatically populate this state to be equal to whatever value is in this input. Now, inside of this handle add movie, we can just first check to see if there's any new movie in the state, if it's not empty, to prevent us from adding empty movies to the list. And what we can do is we can generate a new movie that we're going to add. I'll just call it new movie data, and we're going to set it equal to an object. Now remember, the movie in our state over here, the movie slice, is an ID and a name. So we want to, the ID is increment by 1, right? So what I want to do is in our movie input over here, I want to set the ID of this new movie data equal to ID of the last item in the list, so the last movie in the list, plus 1. Now, if I wanted to do that logic here, I would have to use the useSelector hook, like we did on the other one, to have access to the state. But I don't want to do that. So what I want to actually deal with over here, what I want to do is delete this and just pass into our movie slice logic the name of the movie. And we'll get to that, to changing this action later. But inside of here, we're just going to have to call the add movie action that we created in our movie. Actually, we need to go back twice. Movie slice. So we're going to call the add movie action. And I can't just call it like this. We actually have to use another hook from React Redux. It's called the useDispatch hook. And the way we do it is we just create a function called dispatch and set it equal to the useDispatch hook. And this will allow us to call and dispatch any action that we have in our store and pass in data inside of the specific action that we want. If you recall, the add movie action that we have here has two items, a state and an action. But when we pass this, when we call it, we don't have to pass two things. The state over here, it's auto-populated. We pass only one thing, which is the payload that the action will have access to. And I know it gets a bit weird, but that's why we have that's why we have to call the dispatch. That we're not just calling the add movie function. We're actually doing a lot of things in the background as well. So we're just gonna pass here the new movie, so we can have access in that action list. And then after this, we'll just set the new movie input to be empty. And we'll have to do that, we'll have to pass the value of the input to be equal to new movie. Now, remember, we're not this is just a string. So again, we have to come back here, and when we push this new movie, we can't just push the payload, because the payload now would just be a string. Remember, it's an object. It's supposed to be an object, right? So what we can do is we can use, since we have access to the state over here, we can deal with that logic directly over here. We'll create a new movie object and set it equal to a state, object over here. And it's going to have an ID and it's going to have a name. Now the name is going to be the action.payload, which we're passing in our component. And the ID, if you remember, is going to be the ID of the last object in the state plus 1. So we're going to say state.movies, and we're going to grab the last item in the state.movies list, and we do that by saying state.movies.length minus 1. And that will give us the ID. In this case, if we're only adding the first item, it will be 2. And then we add 1 to the ID. I just realized this can't be a string. This has to be a number to do that. Perfect. And now we can set the name to the payload. And now we change this to just add the new movie. We can save this. And you should see that now if I type over here a new movie, I'll say Harry Potter 2. When we do this and click add movie, it should send the Harry Potter 2 string to our add movie function over here. This add movie should create this object called new movie with an ID equal to 3 in this case, and the name equal to whatever is in this input, and then push that to our state. And since the state is being displayed by the useSelector hook in our movie list, it should now reflect over here. And it does that automatically, as you can see, on different components without having to create a parent state that is passed through props to the components. Now, this is awesome. The only thing we need to do last is deal with the remove movie, which is the other action that we want to create. So to do that, I'm just going to put over here a button right next to the movie name, which is going to be called delete movie. And you'll see now each of the movies will have this button. Now we'll do something very similar to what we did over here. I'll actually even copy this. And we want to handle the remove movie action. Now I'll delete this if new movie if statement over here. And I'll remove this thing over here. The deletion should only dispatch the remove movie function. That's all we need. So to get this dispatch, again, we have to call the useDispatch hook and create the dispatch function. So now you're starting to get the pattern, right? Every time you need to dispatch an action to change a state, you have to call this use dispatch hook. Now we don't want to use the add movie. We want to use the remove movie action from the movie slice, and we don't want to pass in a new movie. We actually haven't created that logic. I'll just pass this over here. What's important with the remove movie is that to know the movie we want to remove, we need to see the ID of the movie and have that being passed in as the payload to this remove movie action. So since we're inside of this loop over here, we do have access to the ID. So I'm going to call over here the handle remove movie, and I'm going to pass in the movie.id, meaning that this function now needs to grab the ID. And when we call the remove movie action, we want to pass in the ID as part of the payload. Inside of our movie slice over here, we are going to do something very similar to what we did over here, but it's a bit easier. The reason why it's easier is because we just want to remove something. We don't need to add anything else and do all of this ID logic over here. We'll actually just say that the movies state is a list, right? And we just want to set it equal to another list without the movie that we want to remove. So what we can do is just say state.movies is equal to state.movies.filter, and then we're going to filter the list of movies. We'll look for each individual movie, and we want to create a copy of this movies list, which will be the same as the movies list that we have before, but whenever the ID is not equal to the ID of the movie we want to remove, we keep that movie. So we're basically here accessing the payload, which is going to be the ID of the movie we want to remove, filtering through the list, and only keeping the movies that isn't that specific movie we want to remove. If you're not familiar with filtering, I recognize this explanation might be a little bit confusing, but I definitely recommend that if you're getting to the stage where you're learning Redux Toolkit and React Redux, you're already expected to understand filtering. But overall, we're just setting the movies list to be the same list as it was before without the movie that we want to remove. Now, this logic should work now. And if we refresh this page, we click on delete movie, you should see that it now deletes the movies from our list. And if we add a new movie, I don't know, I'll just type whatever to be honest, we can just click the delete movie on that one as well. Now, this is basically it for all of the code that you need to set up a very simple application in Redux Toolkit. Now, if you wanted to create more parts of your website or your application that requires different states, you would just create an individual slice for each part of them and then just pass them over here. When you get used to this syntax over here, you realize that it's extremely easy for you to use Redux Toolkit, because yes, it's complicated in the beginning to get used to all of this new terminology. It's complicated to get used to a slice, to what a reducer is, what the use dispatch hook is, and what selectors are. But the thing is, it's always the same. You'll always have a slice that looks similar to this. You'll always just have this one stored that you just pass them over here. And then every time you want to access or change the state, you use the same two hooks. So trust me, if you're required to learn Redux Toolkit, you'll learn it. But it might be tough in the beginning, but then you'll get used to it and it will become a lot easier. Now, that's basically it for today's tutorial. If you want to check out all of the code for this video, it's all going to be in the description, together to a link to my website, where you can see a text-based tutorial version of this video, where if you want to just refer to that one, you can do that as well. Today, we've learned the basics of Redux Toolkit, including setting up the store, creating slices, and dispatching actions to update your state. With Redux Toolkit, you can manage your React app very easily in a very simple and clean way. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who might also find it useful. Also, let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Again, thank you so much for watching this, and I see you guys next time.